G'day everybody, how's it going? Today, I'm in a new studio. It's random, I know there's just a bunch of random stuff I put on the shelf, it'll probably change. Why do I have a new studio? Good question. I'm going to be creating a whole new channel. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's going to be really wonderful. And so I've had dear old Neil working his butt off getting everything ready. So that's why I'm here. So in today's video, what I want to do is give you 5 reasons you should consider going with locals over Patreon if you're a creator on YouTube, especially if you're a Christian. So I'll do that, and then I'll take some Q&A. One of the things that I love doing is helping expose wonderful people to you through Pints with Aquinas. So many people I've had on the show haven't had huge platforms, but they've told me that after they've been on Pints with Aquinas, they've got so many people lined up asking them to come and speak, subscribing to their YouTube channel and things like that. It's just a tremendous joy for me to do that. And, you know, like if you're a creator on YouTube and you want to try to make some money so that you can better your family, so that you can get better cameras, so that you can maybe do this full time, I totally get that. I was one of the first Catholic podcasts out there. I think I was in the top 5 or 10. This was back in 2015. And I was really enjoying doing it. And then I heard about Patreon. And I think maybe I was the first Catholic on Patreon. And now every human being who is a creator is on Patreon. And fair enough, it's a way to make money. And basically, for those who aren't familiar, Patreon's like a social media network where people pay to get different benefits from you. So they patronize your work, they support you, and depending on how much they give, you give them something in return. And that could be physical gifts, virtual gifts, things like that. And I was with Patreon for, over 6 years or so, and still am. I'm on Patreon, I still post on Patreon, I have no intention of canceling Patreon, but primarily because the vast majority of people who support Pints with Aquinas are over on Patreon. But I am doing more on locals right now, and you've probably heard me talking about locals. And so I kind of want to, look, I don't work for locals, and I don't know everything about it. I know some things, and I'll share those with you today. So I'm going to try to be as accurate as I can. But basically, several years ago, Patreon decided to get censorial and ban a couple of big names on their platform. When this happened, you'll remember maybe that Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin decided to cancel their accounts on Patreon, which I think took some cojones, because what is cojones less offensive than balls? I'll just say bull. It took some balls, you know, like it did, because these guys were making a lot of money on these platforms, but they didn't want to be supporting a platform that was canceling people for no good reason. And so they actually did YouTube live streams of themselves canceling. And since that time, people have tried to come up with alternatives, and there are other alternatives to Patreon. Today, I want to share with you why I'm going with locals and why I've just been so thrilled. Because if you're a Christian creator, like I'm pretty sure if you're proclaiming the Christian gospel and basic truths about men and women, there's a significant chance that you'll get banned. And I remember it just being rather frightening, you know, because I had quit my full-time job. I was now doing Pints with Aquinas full-time. People were supporting me on Patreon, and I thought, if they ban me, I'm kind of buggered. What am I going to do, you know? So the folks at Locals reached out to me over a year ago, and they asked if I wanted to, you know, go with them. And I thought, I don't want to do that. Like, it's just exhausting starting on a new platform, and how do I know you're not just as bad as Patreon, etc., etc.? But they were somewhat persistent and convincing. And so at the start of this year, I started posting over on Locals. And if you're a Christian creator and you're looking to make monthly income from those who view you, I think you should go with Locals. Let me give you 5 reasons why that I think are super compelling. And then I'll take some questions if you're in the chat and maybe you want some advice, and maybe I've got something to offer. We'll see. Maybe not, but I think I do. Okay. By the way, I've got a link in the description to my locals community. You can go check that out without paying. You can, and that's one of the things I'll talk about if you want to like look at locals and see what it's about. Here's the first reason you should choose locals over Patreon, namely ownership. You own all of the stuff you post there, and you have ownership, as it were, of the payments that are coming in. So what I mean is this. Locals uses Stripe for people to fund you, whereas Patreon uses its own internal, I guess, processor or something, such that if Patreon bans me tomorrow, I make $0. If Locals bans me tomorrow, I still am getting paid. Does that make sense? So it's not like Locals is giving me the money. They're just connecting with Stripe, and then when you support me for $10 a month, that money's coming from Stripe to me. And the reason I'm using Locals is it's a fantastic platform to connect with those individuals. Now, Locals prides itself on free speech. Whether you're on the far left or the far right, this isn't like a conservative platform. This is just a free speech platform. And they have no intention of banning you. And what's cool is, since they're significantly smaller and a competitor with people like Patreon, I think what that means is it's within their best interest not to ban you. Now, if you're posting pornography or you're posting something criminal or actual threats of violence, no doubt they'll ban you and ought to ban you. But that's it. But let's say I started doing something that people at the top of Locals were getting offended about and they cancelled me. Well, all that would mean is I would keep making money, actually more money, because I give Locals 10% to use their platform, which I think is a very reasonable amount for them to take given how much they give you through Locals. So that's the first thing. They did this intentionally because they wanted creators to keep their own stuff, to own their own stuff. And so that's cool. You build it, you own it, they can't stop you. Like suppose you agree with me and you start going with Locals. And then you think to yourself, you know what? I use a WordPress website and I might just use like something different, like some sort of membership app on WordPress, because if I do that, I only get charged 5% or maybe less. You can do that. All you got to do is cancel Locals and have that app on WordPress connect to your Stripe account. Does that make sense? I think that is huge. You want to leave Locals? They can't stop you. And they brag about that. So good for them. The second reason you should choose Locals over Patreon is the idea of members versus supporters. All right. So if someone's on your Patreon page and engaging and seeing your stuff, it's only because they've taken out a credit card first and they're actively supporting you. On Locals, you can sign up and follow me on Locals and see a lot of the content I'm putting out, and it's still worthwhile, and you don't have to pay a cent. So every morning I have a podcast called Morning Coffee over at mattfradd.locals.com. Anyone can watch it. You just have to sign up on Locals the way you would sign up on Twitter or Instagram to see the things that I'm posting. In other words, there's a huge incentive to follow me even if you're not paying me a cent. So that's huge. And I think what that means is you're in a better place to then convert those people into paying supporters. So I have way more followers or members than I have supporters. But when I put out those daily live streams, a lot of people who are watching aren't supporting me, and I'm in a really good place then to encourage them to support us for whatever reason. So I think that's huge as well. Along with this, the distinction between members and supporters on Locals is only supporters can comment. So if you're a member, you can follow me, you can watch the stuff that I do, but you cannot interact with our community unless you're supporting us monthly. And that's good for me, obviously, because I'd like to make more money, but it's also good for, I think, the respect that's shown. When I post something, or as we'll see when supporters post something, the dialogue is just beautiful. People give each other the benefit of the doubt. They're not there to troll. Like, nobody's paying money so they can come on and be a jerk. People are very respectful and beautiful. It's almost like Locals is is what social media said it would be, namely like social. But social media isn't really like that anymore. Whereas Locals is that. I'm like, wow, this is what social media could have been. This is beautiful. So that's the second reason I'd give. Here's the third reason I'd give: community. On Patreon, there is only activity driven by the content from the creator. All right, so I post stuff to Patreon, you comment under it. On Locals, I'm not the only one who posts. It's also my supporters. So if my supporters see something they think worth talking about, they'll throw it up in the feed, and the whole community can see that and comment under it. And again, it's very respectful and beautiful. And so in our community, people have actually been posting 2 to 3 minute conversion stories. You know, here's how I came to Christ. And you've got people from all around the world who are encouraging them and offering them prayers. So it's not just me who has to feel the pressure to keep posting on Locals to keep people's attention. Again, it's the supporters who are doing that as well. Now, from a creator's standpoint, that's really cool because, you know, I support people on different platforms. If I'm not getting from them what I think is worth my $5 a month or $10 a month, well, I'll cancel and start supporting somebody else. But on Locals, people don't just feel invested in me, they feel invested in the other people who are supporting, which I think is a good incentive for them to continue paying monthly so that they can continue to engage with these people that they're getting to know. Here's the fourth reason you should choose Locals over Patreon. They have a more complete product and user experience. So on Patreon, you have to stream through Vimeo and then like link back to Patreon for people to see it. So if you want to do like a patron only live stream, when I do it, I have to click an unlisted video on YouTube and then link over on Patreon and then tell people about it and then go back over to YouTube and then stream. But Locals has a streaming capabilities built into their software, so you can stream directly from Locals. That's one thing. Also, you don't need other things like a separate Discord. The reason Patreon encourages its creators to use Discord is that they know that the community wants to engage with each other, and they can't do that effectively on Patreon, but they can on Locals. So that's the point. So Locals is just a better product, and the app is sensational. And that's not just me saying that. People have written to me and went, wow, this is just so much better than Patreon. You can tell it's just a much more expensive app, probably. Like, it's a much more sophisticated app. So that would be the fourth reason. Here's the final reason you should choose Locals over Patreon, and that is to say, you get a dedicated creator success team. So on Patreon, if you have a problem, you write to the machine and you get generic answers back, and it's brutal. On Locals, you get a real human being. Case in point, this morning we were going to run a live stream over on Locals. And something went wrong, and it never does this, but I had maxed out how many live streams I could do that month. So I shot an email to a lady who's one of the heads of Locals, and I knew it was like 5:20 in the morning her time, so I didn't expect her to get back to me right away. But I get an email right back on it, and she's fixing it. And then she's texting me, because we've gotten to know each other. It's unbelievable, the kind of personal contact you get with Locals. So whereas with Patreon, you have this like sensorial big tech company, with Locals, you get individuals who are open to free speech. And again, it's not a conservative platform. They're open to people on both sides of the political spectrum. And that's why I think you should go to Locals and not Patreon. Now, if you're watching right now and you're like, dude, I support you on Patreon, two things. I post the same things on Patreon as I do on Locals out of love and respect to you beautiful people who are supporting me there. And I'm grateful that you support me there. So you're not missing out if you're supporting me on Patreon, because when I post to Locals, I post that same thing to Patreon. That said, people have written to me and said, well, do you want me to stop supporting on Patreon and go over to Locals? Yeah, I do. If you want to do that, I would prefer that. So those are the 5 reasons I think you should choose Locals over Patreon. Now, if you have questions, throw them in the live chat, and maybe we can have a back and forth, because it is beautiful that we can live stream. You know, we put a lot of work into this. Like YouTubers and other creators, they put a ton of work into things that they do. Like when I have a guest, like when I have Deacon Harold on yesterday, like I'm paying for his flight, I'm paying for his hotel room. It's like a 3-hour interview. These things take time, you know. I'm paying a videographer, I'm paying a social media team, because in order to do this really well, I need people who know what they're doing. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because of you guys. And I'm just so bloody grateful that I have this job, you know. So, you know, I think it's really great that we live in a day and age where you can do this and get supported by people at a small amount. Because I've worked in places before where it felt like the tail was wagging the dog. What I mean is, you've got someone who's a huge donor. And then this huge donor says to you, I don't like that you're talking about this. Stop talking about it. And I've seen that some places I've worked are like, okay, just hold off. We don't want to lose this money. What's good about being on Locals is people are supporting you for $10 a month, right? So if I do a video on why it was good that Archbishop Cordileone banned Nancy Pelosi from Holy Communion, and I get someone write to me who's really angry, I'm like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I've explained why I do this. You're welcome to quit. Like, they're $10 a month. As grateful as I am for it, it's not going to make or break my ministry. All right. Let's have a look here in the live chat. Andrew Montpetit says, is this set replacing the old set or in addition? No, this is not replacing the old set. This set that you see here will be for a brand new YouTube channel that we're creating that will begin next month. And I'm not going to say anything more about it because I want it to be a surprise. But it's going to be great. And the new channel obviously will be independent of Pints with Aquinas, and it'll be a different kind of topic and theme as well. And if you have any questions, send them in now, and I'd be happy to read them. But the other thing that's really cool is Locals has joined forces with Rumble, and Locals is on Rumble servers. So remember what happened a while ago with Parler, where they got kicked off Amazon's web servers? You know, like they're trying to create this free speech platform, and then Amazon kicks them out, Apple kicks them off, and they're screwed. Well, what's cool about Locals is it's on Rumble's web servers. They're in cahoots with each other now, and so that's not going to be a problem. Sean says, let's put it up here if we can. Pints with Aquinas. So effectively, the paid content on Patreon is available for free over at Locals. Okay, that's a great question. No. On Locals, you can choose if a post is public or if a post only goes out to supporters. When I do a live stream, I've decided to make that public because I think that the incentive to engage with me in the live stream and with the supporters will make you want to financially support me. But the monthly spiritual direction videos from Father Gregory Pine, the audiobooks we're producing monthly, those are only for our supporters. So some is public, some posts are public, some are just for supporters. So it's not the case that the paid content on Patreon is free on Locals. I hope that makes sense. Harrison says, would it be feasible for you to the video and editing yourself when you start out? Also, did you say there was a $10 cap on how much you can make per Patreon on Locals? Look, I think it's important, if you feel like passionate about starting a channel, then you should just start that channel. And feel free to let it be just from your Mac camera. It doesn't have to look fantastic. If you go back and you see my old sets, they weren't great. And I think they're getting better. But I think what's kind of cool is bringing your audience along on that ride. Don't try to raise, like I paid that new set in there. Because of those who support me on Locals and Patreon, I was able to afford it was about $35,000 to kind of redo that studio, get the cameras, get the lights, not to mention then hiring Neil to come on to be the video guy. I couldn't do that in the beginning. So in the beginning, I was just putting out very infrequent videos and doing what I could. I've always been really good at delegating. I'm smart enough to know where I'm stupid. And so I don't want to have to do things that somebody else could do better. So I think that's really good advice for people. Obviously, when you're starting out, you don't have the liberty to pay people because you maybe aren't making enough money to do that. But as I made more money, I was able to then give it to more people to do things better than I could. Heroic Act says, is lo-fi back monetized by YouTube? So yeah, no, YouTube demonetized our lo-fi channel for no good reason, which is really unfortunate because I even appealed it and said this is all my content. But again, you're dealing with a machine. You're not dealing with a human being. I'm not even sure if a human being saw what I posted. So when I actually did a video on this, I had a bunch of people support me on locals, and if we get a few more people, I'm going to be able to keep producing those lo-fi videos even though they're not being monetized on YouTube, because obviously it's expensive to pay someone to create a beautiful animation, not to mention to create all those lo-fi beats. So the answer is no. Ashworth, nice to see you. He says, saw a video of you singing with Emma. You have an amazing voice. Y'all should do a sibling music series. Thank you very much. Yeah, if you look up Matt and Emma Fradd singing, that could be fun. Andrew says, what are some of the difficulties of using locals? Are there any downsides? I'd say the only downside that I think is, well, I don't even know if it's a downside, but you don't have the tier system. So on Patreon, you can say, give $5, get this, get $10, give $10, get this, give $20, give this. Where on locals, they don't have that. On locals, there's 2 tiers. You pay something a month, and then you get access to everything. You get the ability to communicate in the comment section, to post your own stuff. That's the other thing that's really cool. Like, if you are a supporter of mine on locals, the more I'm able to grow locals, the more people see the stuff you're posting. So it's like we're kind of both winning together, which I like. The second tier on locals is if you want to be able to email me directly. So those are the 2 things. Now, there's like a workaround. So what I've said is like those pints with Aquinas beer steins, they're really expensive to make, actually, even though I just gave 500 away for free the other day. It was more like 600. So what I've said is, okay, so if you're a $20 supporter and you give to me annually, as opposed to monthly, I'll send you a free beer stein. I'll even pay the shipping, even if you live in like Germany or Australia or whatever. So that's cool. So that would be the only kind of downs, but in a way it makes it a lot simpler, because I think one of the difficulties with Patreon is coming up with all these physical gifts that you have to send to people. Whereas on locals, they've created it so that's really not a thing you have to do. You don't have to feel the pressure to do that. And the community, I think, is what really draws people in and keeps them there, way more than the one beer stein I may have sent you like 5 months ago. Brock says, so if I am a patron on Patreon right now, you would prefer I switch my payment over to locals? Yeah. Now, I want to reiterate, I'm not going anywhere. And don't, if you're a patron, like, don't be afraid that I'm posting special content to locals I'm not to Patreon. That's not happening. I am posting to both because it's easy enough to do that. But yes, I would prefer you go over to locals. And if you can, to give the same amount on locals as you do on Patreon, you know, if you want. Do whatever you want, obviously. Elias says, hey, Matt from Sydney. What's up? Nice to see you. Orion says, oh, Ori, what's up? Now, just so everybody knows, Ori works for locals, and I am surprised to see her here. What's up? Why don't you answer the questions? I'm just going to sit back and drink my espresso. They'll ask, and yeah. People can pay you whatever they want on locals. The creators sets whatever minimum they want. Yeah, so if you wanted to give me $1 a month, I suppose you could do that. But, Ori, feel free to correct me. Heroic Axe says, did YouTube review your appeal to remonetize? Yes, they did, and then they declined it. Matthew says, since locals is new, isn't it more risky than Patreon? That's a fair question. And that was my hesitancy in joining locals when they approached me about 3 years ago. But they've only gone from strength to strength. And one of the ways I can tell that objectively is they keep adding new additional features to locals. And you don't do that unless you have a significant amount of money coming in. That would be one thing. The second thing is they are now, they have joined forces with Rumble. And so they're only going from strength to strength. So fair enough, but here's the thing. Even if locals goes under, remember what I said earlier, the first reason you should choose locals over Patreon is you are getting paid directly by your supporters. It's not going through Locals in the way it goes through Patreon. So if Locals goes under tomorrow, I'm still getting paid monthly. In fact, I get paid more because I don't get charged the 10% fee that Locals charges me every month. Does that make sense? Why haven't you spoken out about Dave Rubin doing IVF? I think IVF is evil. I think it was wrong for Dave Rubin to do that. Are we done? I mean, it's hard to talk about everything. There's a lot of things going on. Chris says, I'm staying here because of the beer stein. Sweet. Gregory says, what are your thoughts on David Wood deleting the YouTube channel to build something more permanent? I think he's got a lot of courage to do that. But I kind of wish he didn't do that. I think it would probably be more prudent to keep the YouTube channel up and just let that content be there for people on YouTube. But that's really none of my business. That's up to him. What does it cost to start a Locals channel? Precisely $0.00. It's think of it as a social media platform, but you can post things that are only available to people who are supporting you financially, monthly, or annually. The other thing that's cool about Locals is when I post something, I can actually send an email out to all of those people. So whereas on Twitter, you get shadow banned or like 5 people see your tweet, even though you've got hundreds of thousands of followers or whatever, or thousands of followers. On Locals, you can actually make it so that you can email every single person that's following you. So that's kind of cool. Yes, you own 100% of the content on Locals. Do you see what I mean? Like, this is just a no-brainer. So I would say, like, the way I made the transition from Patreon to Locals is because it confuses people, right? Like, if you've got 2 things, hey, you can support me on Patreon or Locals. It's like an extra hurdle for people who want to give to you. And people giving to you is already a hurdle, and you don't want to make it more complicated. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to try Locals out, and if I actually find it beneficial, I'm going to give it more. You know what I mean? Like, I'll give it a little bit, and if I see the return, I'll give it a little bit more. And if I see more return, I'll give it a little bit more. And I've been doing this since January, and I've just found it's head and shoulders above Patreon, so I'm just giving increasingly more to it in regards to time and things like that, you know? So, if you have a Patreon account and a Locals account, and let's say you have a YouTube channel like mine, you might want to begin by saying, there's now 2 ways you can support me, on Patreon and Locals. Just so people on Patreon aren't freaked out as to why you're now talking about Locals only. But then over time, if you want to move over to Locals, which I really just think it's within your best interest, that's just my opinion, maybe you have a different one, you could then phase out the Patreon language and then only talk about Locals. And that's where I'm at right now. Hey, Hallelujah says, have you heard of Odyssey video streaming? According to David Wood, Rumble is sketchy. Yeah, I heard him say that. That's not been my experience at all, and I can really only go with what I know. I've chatted with some of the heads over at Rumble, and I think they're terrific. And so all of my videos that are on YouTube go over on Rumble as well. So, you know, like, you've got to choose. I mean, there's so many different platforms that you could be like spending your time on, and I only have a certain amount of time, and I want to be as effective as possible. Chris says, I must say the titles of your YouTube sips from your long interviews are so good. Are you coming up with the titles? No, Neil does that. So in addition to Neil doing the video work, I pay him to clip the videos, to come up with the thumbnails, come up with the titles, to schedule them. And do you believe this? He still wants to be paid. How selfish is that? Every month he wants more money. So that's another reason you should. I'm joking. I think we pay him a very fair wage, and he's very happy here. But that's part of the reason you should start supporting me on Locals if you haven't already, because it's not going to my yacht fund collection. It's going to my social media team. It's going to Neil. It's going to pay the guests. It's going to pay the debaters. It's going to pay my marketing team, so that this thing can be as effective as it can be. There's a saying in Australia: "Water's free, whiskey costs money." And I think, yeah, you can get something for cheap, but there's a reason it's cheap or free. And so I think the more people have been able to support me, they've seen that my content's only gone, I was going to say good to great, but I wouldn't claim that it's great, but it's getting better and better, you know. Roger says, have you been approached by producers who are essentially locals consultants? It sounds like an opportunity to allow content providers to focus on content and not worry about the details. Have I been approached by producers? I might be too ignorant to really understand what you mean there. I could tell you that I had a few, like, because I had a relation, me and Dave Rubin know of each other. I've interviewed him a few times and I don't know him, but he, I guess, encouraged locals, because Dave Rubin started locals, or at least he was one of the people that started locals. And so they then reached out to me to try to get me on locals. And they were persistent, and it worked, I guess. Andrew says, is there a live chat feature on Rumble like this, or is that integrated on the locals platform? Is there a live chat feature? So on locals, you can stream directly. I think, although I'm not going to speak for locals, that since locals and Rumble are now one unit, it wouldn't surprise me if in the future, maybe not so distant future, when I live stream on locals, I can stream both the locals and Rumble at the same time. And maybe I could even live stream on Rumble and it goes directly to locals. I don't know. But like that stuff's happening, Yeah, this person wants the lowdown. So if you go back to the start of the video, I very briefly share with you 5 reasons you should choose locals over Patreon. So anyway, I hope that really helps, because I am for the proclamation of the gospel to as many people as possible. And I know money and ministry is weird because we've had so many experiences of people abuse that. You feel like the only reason they're talking about particular topics is that they keep making that bling, and maybe they care more about money than Christ. That's true, right? And all of us have to look at that within us. But it's also true that if you have a full-time job that you hate, joining locals and starting to create content that maybe you're good at could be a way for you to support your family. So I love, locals says it empowers creators. I love kind of empowering apostolates and beautiful people on YouTube. That's partly why I choose the people I do to come on Pints with Aquinas. I just think they're great souls, saints among us, doing great work, and I want to draw attention to them. So the reason I did this video is I want you to succeed. Really, I really, really, really do. This is not a zero-sum game. This is not, well, if you join locals, then maybe people will give less to me. I don't care about that. I want your channel to do incredibly well. I want you to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. And if you're gifted at creating in any capacity, and you could be supported, in that capacity so that you can do it full time, man, how beautiful is that? So anyway, click the link below, mattfradd.locals.com. Even if you don't want to support me financially, you can join the community in a free capacity. You won't be able to comment or anything like that, but you'll at least get to see how locals works and decide for yourself if it's worth your time. The other thing I've found is when I ask people who are watching my content on locals, like many people say, hey, I just switched from Patreon to locals. And I say, which one do you like more? Because in the beginning, I was obviously concerned about that. If I like locals more, but they hate it, well, that doesn't benefit me, so maybe I need to go back over to Patreon. But time and time again, without exception, everyone's like, this is way better, So check it out, mattfradd.locals.com, and then you could also start your own page, and people can follow you like they would follow you on Twitter or Instagram, and you can post stuff there. And no one has to pay for you to be posting stuff. So maybe here could be a plan for you, right? Let's say you don't really have a platform right now and you're trying to grow it. Maybe you start a locals account and everything you post there is free for everybody. What happens then? Okay, people start following you. All of a sudden you've got a couple of hundred people following you and seeing the content you're putting out. And then you say, would you guys mind supporting me for $5 a month, $3 a month? And if you do, you can then comment under this content. And they're right there. And it's sort of just a much easier, more fluid way to go about it. Okay, God bless you, my friends. I hope that clears up some things for you. And